All right, so I am in Glasgow, Barron County, with Sam Terry of Sam Terry's Kentucky,
Mhm.
local historian amongst other things. So, and we'll start off by asking you, what's your connection to Kentucky?
My connection to Kentucky is I am a native, lifelong resident of Kentucky, and one of the things that helps me appreciate Kentucky is its history,
Mm-hmm.
and so I like to share that knowledge with other people, whether it's in my hometown
Yeah.
or people around the world.
Well, and I know you've got a pretty big following out there on Sam Terry's Kentucky with the
Yes,
Facebook and the
and the
website.
website, yes, it's very popular, and
Yeah.
people look forward to getting the daily snippet of
Yeah.
Kentucky history.
How'd that get started?
Actually, I started that 6 years ago, and it was sort of a spin-off of a newspaper column I once had done, and it took off.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept was just to find something that happened in Kentucky history for every date on a standard calendar,
Yeah.
no matter whether it was in chronological order or not. And so uh, it's interesting in that it hops around.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like your history class in
Right.
seventh grade, and I think people enjoy that because it mixes things up a little bit. You don't get bogged down in a period or a topic that you're not too interested in.
Right.
And so the concept was to do a daily piece about something or someone connected to that date,
Mm-hmm.
and it's gone very well. People seem to enjoy it.
I know I do, and I love that it jumps around, like you said. So many times history tends to get into the like just the beginnings of settlement here, kind of
Hmm.
pioneer day kind of things, and
Hmm.
I love that yours it may be all over the map, and
Yes,
as far as time
and
goes.
it's a neat way to find uh, things that were important in history that might relate to a larger event, but to know the details of why something happened and find out what date that happened on. I've always been fascinated by the fact that there was a specific date that the spelling of Kentucky changed
Oh, I did not know
from
that.
having an E on the end,
Okay.
and it was changed to Y by the Virginia legislature when we were still part of Virginia.
Oh, okay. So
And
before,
so, uh, people are fascinated by little tidbits like that.
yeah,
And of course, there was quite an evolution of Kentucky becoming Kentucky a state.
right.
And, there were like 7 constitutional conventions before they finally could ratify one and become a state. And it was years in the making
Mm-hmm.
for that to happen. And it's kind of fun to delve into that period, as long as many others too, of course.
Right.
But uh, it's nice to find those little nuggets.
Well, I read somewhere, maybe you can confirm this, that Kentucky was going to be the first state after the original colonies, but it took them so long to get the paperwork basically done or to ratify.
That's correct. That's correct.
And
So we're
so
number 15.
number 15, but
And originally, soon after we became a state, we had a star on the U.S. flag. There were 15 stars, not 13,
mm-hmm.
and we also had a stripe. And of course, as we began adding more states to the Union, uh, someone at some level said, we can't just keep adding random stars
Yeah,
to the blue field on the flag. So it was decided to honor the original 13 colonies, and so with the stars and the stripes for each state. So of course we lost our star.
I did not know that. I always assumed the stars were just like had grown linear, but they stayed. So they went to 15, and then they went back to
Back to
13,
13.
and then started adding them again.
Hmm.
I guess later,
Hmm.
obviously. And
Hmm.
yeah, I can't imagine 50 stripes. That would have been a mess.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So it's been modified, but Kentucky was an important place
mm-hmm.
in the very beginning, and we carried a tremendous amount of influence in the workings of this country for uh, several decades in the early 19th century. And Kentucky was looked upon as a unique place we had interesting and colorful leaders
Mm-hmm.
along the way. And a lot of interesting things, of course, have happened here.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's start with talking just a little bit about the history of Glasgow, since we're here.
Sure.
And I know we were talking a little bit about it this morning, but this place exploded or became a bigger city a little later than some of the cities in the state that.
Yes.
Came
Glasgow was or Barron County was founded in 1798. The very end of the year, December the 20th. You can't get much later in the calendar.
Just
than
under the wire.
20th of December, but it was 1798. Glasgow was formed May the 10th of 1799. So it took a little while to get organized with the county seat. But we were a very small population for quite some time. And we grew as the number of settlers decided to come here, and the original population here had a lot of Scotch-Irish roots. Primarily, families came here because someone in that family had received a land grant from Virginia, and that was in payment for their services in the American Revolution. And the lands that were south of the Green River were reserved for Virginia veterans in the American Revolution. So when we study all of these counties along the southern portion of Kentucky, right in the middle, they're just packed with patriotic settlers who came here to claim their land. But Glasgow progressed. We had various educational institutions that were working early on. 1850, that era was a big uproar because the Louisville and Nashville Railroad was being built. And the controversy was whether the railroad would go through Glasgow or not. And of course, Glasgow wanted the railroad to have rail service here.
Right.
There were two proposed routes for the railroad. One would have come through Greensburg and the tip of Barron County at Bearwalla, and then on to Glasgow, on to Scottsville, and then to Lebanon, Tennessee, and into Nashville.
Okay.
However, other interests were, oh no, we don't want to do that. We want to go from Elizabethtown to Mumfordville, Horse Cave. Cave City was just being created as basically a resort town. There were people that lived there year-round, but a lot of folks were pushing that town as a resort place to build a summer cottage and go spend your summer touring the caves.
Right.
And from Cave City, it went on to present-day Park City, which was to become Glasgow Junction, and on to Bowling Green. So there's always been a little bit of tug-of-war back and forth between Bowling Green and Glasgow, and Glasgow was just slightly off the beaten path, and we didn't get the railroad in our town, but we had very enterprising people who were very determined that we're not going to be left out of this railroad business. And so the Glasgow Railway Company was formed in 1854, and it's 10 miles of track that connect Glasgow Junction, today's Park City, and Glasgow, Kentucky. So that enabled us, for our residents, to move about, to travel, people to easily access Glasgow. It gave us a means of selling our agricultural products here, primarily tobacco, cattle. Early on, we even had some cotton being grown in this part of Kentucky. And so it certainly helped to propel Glasgow's prosperity over the years. And we would not have had that had it not been for that little 10 miles of track, as one of the late owners used to quip about it, that his railroad was only 10 miles, but it was just as wide as everybody else's railroad.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. And that's still you said that's the oldest?
Yes, it's still the oldest continuously operating business in Barron County.
That's incredible.
Which is pretty special.
Yeah.
And then after the war, there was sort of a boom in lots of places. We had a big influx of immigrants coming to Glasgow and Barron County.
Okay.
A lot of people are surprised by that. And a lot of German immigrants, uh, uh, Russian Jews flocked here. A good percentage of our square's businesses were owned and operated by Jewish merchants.
Oh, okay.
And they were all very prosperous, perhaps the most notable being Emmanuel Morris. And right across the square on the corner, you see the Morris building.
Yeah, they're doing all the work.
That
right
was
now.
his building.
Okay,
And
yeah.
a very interesting character. Played a big role in our local history. Also, his grandson, Arthur Kroc, became the head of the Washington Bureau for the New York Times.
Oh.
And he covered something like 11 presidents
Wow.
in his career. And he won 4 Pulitzer Prizes along the way. So we're pretty proud of Arthur Kroc being able to say that he was born in our community.
As he should be.
And so the town continued progressing through the latter half of the 19th century and then really started growing in the early 20th century.
Well, I've noticed some of the buildings here seem to be, I don't want to say newer, but they're not necessarily early 1800s. Some of them.
No, they're not. The wall of what's now the home of Fine Arts Bistro is the oldest standing brick wall in our community.
Okay.
And most of the other original buildings are long gone. Some of the foundations are still there with new buildings built on top of them. Today, you and I are sitting on the east side of the square.
Okay.
And this entire side of the square burned to the ground in 1900.
Okay.
And that was in, I believe, early May. And by October, the entire block of buildings had been rebuilt.
Wow.
With the exception of one storefront. And that was simply because the owner didn't know for sure what they wanted to build back there. So, we know that there's an entire block of our downtown area that was all built at the same time.
Right.
1900. And so those buildings, today they seem old to us, but in the big picture, they're not really terribly old. But they've evolved over time.
Well, they're beautiful buildings, though. It's not.
Yes.
I mean, they feel like they fit down here. It's not a.
Well, it's a nice mixture of styles of architecture, and we've had sort of a renaissance of our downtown area in the last few years, with properties changing hands, a generational change, and new owners with perhaps younger ideas and more contemporary ideas about having a way to tastefully reuse a historic building for a new purpose. And the building you and I are sitting in today was a drugstore.
Okay, I was going to say I'd like to talk a little bit specifically about this one because we're in. I'll give a little shout out to the folks with Simple Life, and this is the Copper and Elk Airbnb space, and I've been staying here. This is immaculate. I mean, such a beautiful space upstairs with the loft and everything, and I'll have some more information about that folks can see.
It definitely is one of the crown jewels of our community, and and hats off to Mike and Beth Wagner, who took the risk.
They really did,
and made a significant investment to buy the property and then properly restore it and find new uses for it. But historically, a drugstore had been located in this spot, and that ended probably back in the early 1970s. And the buildings became a variety of things over the years: a ladies' dress shop, a shoe store, children's clothing. A section of this building downstairs was used as a charitable fundraising thrift shop, and people would donate their used clothing, and others could come buy it for a very minimal amount of money and that sort of thing. So it's wonderful to see these buildings being put back to use. I think we're right on the cusp of having people interested in living downtown on the upper stories of these
Yeah.
buildings, and that was how they were used when they were built.
Hmm.
Families who own businesses tended to often live above their store.
Hmm.
So
No, when I walked into this place, I was like, I can move into this.
yes,
This is very much a livable space. It's
yes,
not just a place to sleep for the night.
it
I
is
was like,
indeed.
and being able to walk to the restaurants and everything, just being right in the midst of it. There's so
Exactly.
much going on down
Exactly.
here.
We
Yeah.
have a little bit of nightlife in the community now. We have some restaurants on our downtown square, some specialty shops, and I think more of those coming.
Hmm.
And of course, just around the corner, Historic Plaza Theater has been restored and reopened for about 20 years now.
Yeah.
And that's another crown jewel of the community as well.
Yeah. Well, and even off the square, there's a number of
Oh,
these kind of
yes.
properties that have
Oh,
been
yes.
restored, and some amazing shops that
Yes.
I've
Well,
gotten
and
to
it's
go
kind of
to.
fun,
Yeah.
especially the ones that are tucked away off the beaten
Mhm.
path, just a few feet. So it pays to go exploring down that pedestrian walkway and that sort of thing, and see what's down there, because there's some pretty nice places.
Yeah, you go back there, and I was amazed with what they've done, and then they've told me more of what's to come, and
Mhm.
they said some of it I can't talk about quite yet, but there's some
Sure.
exciting things happening that
Sure.
I think are going to be really neat.
Mhm. And of course, as happens frequently, when you have properties like the Wagner's work here that we're in, that inspires other people
Hmm.
to want to join the fun
Right.
of that. And what can we do to bring this building back and make it a thriving part of the community?
Well, I see that when I travel too, is that people are interested, but they're nervous maybe because they're like, well, but what's my neighbor doing
Mhm.
in these old buildings? And when you see somebody's done this, then you're willing to say, well, if I go in next to this, I don't have to worry about this building being
Mhm.
dilapidated because it's already there. So really that first person in is a pioneer of sorts
They are
in this
indeed.
new,
Yes.
in this new generation, as
Yes.
you say,
Yes.
people taking the reins.
So theoretically, a person could come here on an extended visit or a short visit, or to live and be right downtown in the hub of the city, within walking distance of just about everything you need. You've got restaurants, entertainment, recreational activities, sometimes that take place right outside the door.
Yeah.
With concerts on the square and that sort of thing, within walking distance of several of the major churches in the community. So it's nice to see people understanding once again that we can really enjoy our community as pedestrians.
Yes.
We don't have to get in a car and hunt for a parking spot. And one of the things with downtowns is people always want to say, oh, well, there's not enough parking. Well, there's plenty of parking.
There's plenty of parking.
It's the management of the parking
Yes.
that's inadequate, and how you use it. And it's nice to see some thoughts progressing in that way, to realize, hey, I could actually live downtown and very rarely use my car.
Well, I've been here for 3 days. I've moved my car a couple times to go to outlying parts of the county, but I haven't had any trouble finding a place to park.
No, there's
even in the middle of the day when it's busy, there's plenty of parking. But it goes back to, I always say too, like, you go to the big box grocery store, you're walking the distance of going across the square just to get to the front door.
Exactly.
So it's not that big a deal, folks, to come park downtown and walk around. And once you find your spot, you're good.
Sure.
You can go everywhere. And like you said, have it all. It really feels like what, I know people kind of get nervous about that term, but 15-minute city,
Yes.
where you have everything within that sphere, including...
Because, and the absolute fact is, no one visits a town because they have plenty of parking.
No.
They come to visit the town because of its charm, its history, its beauty, the culture that the locals enjoy, and it's not for a parking spot. They'll find a parking spot.
If parking was that important, Disney would be a mess.
Yes.
You do not park close to that place. But yeah. Excuse me a second. I need a
Sure.
little. Now, one place I just walked to, and I'd like to talk just for a minute about, is the museum down here, because you all have an incredible museum that I think people don't talk about nearly enough.
Mhm.
With the give me the proper name of it, because
It's the South Central Kentucky Cultural Center.
okay.
And that started with a different name,
Mm-hmm.
the Museum of the Barons. And it was to be a museum that told the story of the Barons. And the Barons is an area where Native Americans visited and used a slash and burn method of burning off the prairies.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, brought new growth for foodstuffs, but it also exposed wildlife and became a hunting ground for them.
Okay.
And that extended not just in Barron County, primarily the north half of the county, but surrounding counties. So it was a multi-county thing. When we were working on creating the museum, we found that we just couldn't get the grant funding that we envisioned, that we hoped to get,
Mm-hmm.
using the vision we had. And so we realized, well, we need to broaden our vision.
Mm-hmm.
We can do more. We need a facility that can be a cultural center,
Yes.
a place that is not just a museum, a place that people can come and do research, a place that you might go to a concert, you might go to for lectures, art exhibits, just a whole variety of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mrs. Beulah Nunn was not the first president. I think she was actually about the third. But the wife of the former governor was instrumental in pushing and using her contacts to propel that project forward. And we were very fortunate that we bought the old Kentucky Pants Factory
Mm-hmm.
for a very small amount of money for a 3-story, 30,000 square foot building, plus 2 storefront buildings,
Mm-hmm.
a parking lot, and another section of buildings. We had everything on the block originally except one building, and that was a perfect thing to do because temporarily the museum operated in various storefronts,
Oh, okay.
and it just didn't work. There was no space, there was no storage, it was not climate controlled, and that sort of thing. And so when we broadened our vision to become more,
Mm-hmm.
it really opened a lot of opportunities, not only for ways to use the building and have a museum, but also to involve the community and be able to get grant funding. So we were very fortunate that we got 2 federal ICE-T grants that are transportation grants because the structure is on 2 federal highways. And
okay.
so that helped us to get the building restored and presentable for the many uses that we had for it at that point. And unfortunately, Mrs. Nunn passed away before that came to fruition. I succeeded her in leading that effort for a few years, and it's just amazing to see what's there now, because people would walk in before we did anything to the building, and they would just basically say, "You all have lost your mind. What are you going to do with all of this space?"
Yeah.
And now, it's pretty full, and the staff there and the volunteers look, well, where can we expand storage of our collection that's
Mm-hmm.
not on display at every given moment, and what else can we do in this structure? So it's been fascinating. I think, as would be the case in any town, uh, local people take things for granted.
Mm-hmm.
We will all get in our car or on a plane and go to all the hot spots for a vacation, and we'll admire their downtowns and all of the various facilities they have there, but we won't necessarily go down the street
Mm-hmm.
when we have something that is actually very comparable
Right.
to things that you see in much larger areas. Uh, I recently hosted some people and took them to the cultural center, and they were just spellbound. They said, "This is the best local history museum I think I've ever been in. It's just unbelievable, all of the stories of this community that one can learn here, and you really can't see it all in one visit and really appreciate what's there,
Right.
and learn from it. You almost need to make multiple trips for the museum portion, but it's been another one of those crown jewels
Mm-hmm.
in our community, because we took a building that was abandoned, that was being sold in bankruptcy court,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just amazing because, you know, 30 years ago, the idea would have been, well, we just need to knock it down and maybe we can resell that lot and something nice will come.
Or we'll put some parking there.
Or we'll add parking. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But no, well, and kind of reflecting back to the beginning of the conversation, I love that it's not just, well, here's what it looked like when there were log cabins. There's some of that, and that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes up all the way into eras that I lived through. I mean, I remember things that I'm like, I remember going in, it was about 2 years ago that the third floor opened with the more, I guess you might call it modern history.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in, I was like, we had that telephone. Why is that in a museum? But then I realized, well, it's a little bit older than
exactly
you realize. But I think that's great foresight on you all's part.
And it helps to teach, especially young people, about the evolution of communication, if you're using that as an example. But I think the third floor is just great. It's not necessarily a time period. It's a lot of different areas and subjects, and those items are just beautifully displayed. They're interesting to see. We've had a lot of notable people here, and you can see artifacts from them.
Mm-hmm.
Diane Sawyer was born in our local hospital.
Yeah.
Julian Goodman became the president of NBC and grew up right here. And Billy Vaughn, the composer and musician, won 12 gold records, and he was the first person in the world to earn a platinum record. And he started here as a barber on this very square.
Yeah.
And thanks to the GI Bill, as a veteran, he got to go to college, and that was how the Hilltoppers Quartet was formed. And so we have all of those stories that are just fascinating.
Yeah.
And of course, people like Arthur Kroc. We've had 2 governors of Kentucky from this community. So it's fascinating to review all of that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed going through, and I've been in there before. I went today just for a little bit, and just that room full of pictures of people who are notable, Harlem Globetrotters, and you know, just folks of all walks of life that went on to make a name for themselves in a big way. And I think that's really important too for people locally to see.
Oh, absolutely.
One, that people came from here, but also you can come from here and go to, if that's what you're inclined to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, and passing on that knowledge is, you know, that's a constant in our mission with all of these things related to history.
Right.
Is we want to pass information to younger generations. If we don't, we're going to lose it. And you and I talked earlier about walking tours.
Yes.
I created a Civil War walking tour. One day I had an 8th grade teacher in our middle school call and say, "Could you give us a tour of Fort Williams?" And my response was, "Yes, I can do that, but you realize you can tell most of the history of Fort Williams in just a few minutes that we had at that point." And I said, "I'm quite frankly not certain that it would be worth getting the kids bussed over there to be there for just a few minutes and bussed back. How about we do something different? Let's do a walking tour and look at things related to the Civil War that are in our community." And the response was, "But I don't know what those places are. I don't know who to go to." And I said, I'll do your tour. I will create it. And it's fascinating because we've taken as many as about 180 kids on that walking tour
Wow.
each year. And not all as one group,
Oh,
of
okay.
course,
I was like, wow,
but
that's
you know, it's a
yeah.
community effort
Hmm.
because when I do that, the police department knows, and there's an officer at every
Yeah.
crosswalk, every intersection that we're on foot going through, and they stop traffic for us and see that everybody gets where they're going. But the amazing thing is at the end of the tour, which takes, you know, almost 2 hours,
Hmm.
because we cover some ground. And for some of the kids, that might be the longest walk they've ever taken. But, you know, they're spellbound and say, you know, I had no idea that history happened in Glasgow
Right
or that
here.
it happened in Barron County. I didn't know that. I just thought history was what we had in the classroom
Hmm.
from our textbook. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. I think it's great to connect them like that and
Yes,
make them see
it
that,
is,
yeah,
and that
living in
offers other opportunities to include other aspects of our history and notable people.
it. Hmm.
Uh, you know, one of the things that I point out, which in today's world causes everyone to sort of cringe, and they should, was that we had a slave auction block
Hmm.
right on the corner of the square, and it stayed there well into the 20th century. By that time, a lot of people didn't realize what it was. They just thought it was some weird box
Yeah.
sitting sort of almost out in the street. And it's amazing to realize that, you know, there was a period where people, human beings, were being sold as property
Yeah.
to other people. And, uh, you know, and in a relatively short number of decades, say to the early 20th century, then we had local people like the aviatrix Willa Brown,
Hmm.
who became the first African American woman to earn a pilot's license for commercial pilots in this country.
Hmm.
She and her husband created the Coffee School of Aeronautics to train African American young men to fly planes. And some of their students became part of the Tuskegee Airmen. And you know, it's almost kind of makes you get a tingle when you think
Yeah.
about those extremes, and that all happened in a 60, 70-year span of
Yeah.
time, and yet it's all part of our history, and there's something to be learned
Hmm.
from both ends of that spectrum.
And you said that there's a historic marker out here for her, correct?
Yes, we do have a historical marker for Willa Beatrice Brown there that tells a small portion of her story,
Hmm.
and uh, that was a local effort to erect that monument between our local historical society and the Glasgow Business and Professional Women's Club, because they were very interested in telling the stories of successful women
Hmm.
in our community, and so that was a real project of a great interest. It
Right.
excited a lot of people.
Right. Well, and you talking about the walking tour and just the juxtaposition of that against what had been there, as you said, 60 years prior,
Hmm.
is pretty incredible, and it's good that you can be able to bring that to life for people and see that
It is.
evolution and then continue with the stories of today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Civil War tour ends in Fort Williams,
Okay.
and this year we've sort of had a renaissance of Fort Williams. It had gotten in very poor condition,
Hmm.
and a lot of deferred maintenance.
I noticed it looked like there's some new wood around the
Hmm.
inside and
There
stuff. You
is,
want to talk a little
and
bit about?
so uh, that fort, the remains of it were there throughout the early 20th century, and it became a thicket of locust trees. And in the early 1970s, an effort was made to clean that up. And then the idea was, well, you know, the earthen part of the fort is here,
Hmm.
so why can't we rebuild the whole thing? Because the plans for it are in the Library of Congress.
Oh yeah.
And
Okay.
so it literally was rebuilt as a small fort by those same plans. And uh, people have enjoyed it over
Hmm.
the years. The fort was never truly finished. So that's why we didn't finish it either. We don't want to
Okay.
create history that never existed.
Right.
And and the one major thing that happened there was a skirmish between Union and Confederate soldiers when the Confederates raided the fort, October of 1863, when the fort had just been built a few months.
Well, and I think it's important to point out it was a Union fort, which people may not expect.
Yes, it was.
In this part of this.
And, well, our town was truly a divided town. We talk about brother against brother, and it was neighbor against neighbor also. And the Union forces were not well received in this community that were staying in Fort Williams. But along the way, we had the amazing fortune of discovering a series of letters written by a Union soldier from Illinois who was in Fort Williams.
Oh.
And the letters are all to his wife. And he had the ingenious idea to number his letters, and she numbered hers, so that way they knew if they were getting all of the letters they were sending one another.
Oh, okay.
Because the numbers needed to be in the right order. And he actually writes about helping to build the fort.
Okay.
And he drew his own sketch of the fort and sent it in a letter to his wife, and it's just like the plans for it. It's amazing. But he also describes how the different units were organized within the fort and around the fort. The pup tents they were assigned and hated, and how they got their food. They earned the nickname in this community of the Tater Diggers, because
at That's
night,
quite a name.
Yes. Well, at night, apparently, a lot of those soldiers would slip down into the town from the fort and raid gardens.
Yeah.
And dig up the potatoes and raid the smokehouses and help themselves to a ham or two.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So they weren't much appreciated for those antics. But it's part of the story. And the Messer letters, give us exactly what went on a daily basis, even the daily schedule of what everybody was doing at any given time. So that has brought a whole new perspective to the fort.
It's really interesting.
It's fascinating. I've studied history all of my life. I learned things about the Civil War by reading those letters that I'd never known, I'd never encountered before. And it's just fascinating because it's a real time look at how they were surviving and what they thought about things going on with the war. And because they were getting reports of, well, we hear John Hunt Morgan is headed our way, and the fort was partially built to keep Morgan at bay. And so we now have those. The new interpretive panels are not installed yet, but they are in process. And we're using excerpts from the letters to actually tell the story of the fort and how it came about and was built and what happened there on a day-to-day basis when it was in use. But that one little skirmish, both the Union commander and the Confederate commander wrote their reports to send in. And if you read them, they're absolutely the opposite. They both claimed victory. They both claimed they killed more people. They both claimed that they confiscated so many weapons, so much ammunition, and they got so much cash. And so one wonders, what really did go on there in October of 1863? So that's sort of been a conundrum for us for years. It's like, well, we know something happened here. Here's what the Union guys said happened. Here's what the Confederate soldiers said happened. What do you think? And so the Messer letters have opened doors that we didn't even know existed, and gives us a view into a period of time there. But restoring the fort again and replacing all of the rotten wood and so forth has been a community effort. We've had local people in the community, our area technical school, carpentry class has
Mm-hmm.
used that as a class project.
Oh, nice.
All the kids come
Yeah.
and they're there for a class period or two, and they were actually the ones measuring, because every board had to be measured to a specific length in order
Oh,
for it to fit.
to make
It wasn't just nailing some boards to some
Yeah.
posts. It had to be cut to fit perfectly. And so they used the skills they were learning to do just that. And so we had 2 years of students
Wow.
that worked on that. And we've had a volunteer service group called Love Loud that has come for 2 summers and done projects there. So it's coming along. It's still not quite where we want it to be,
Right.
and where we envision we can take that. But it's a fascinating place to visit.
Well, and it's a beautiful. I mean, you're up on that hill. It's a beautiful view from
Oh
up
yes,
there.
you can see a good portion of
You
Glasgow.
can see Glasgow, and then surrounded by that cemetery. And I know there's some monuments there for some of the.
Yes, there are several Civil War veterans buried there.
Mhm.
I will add that the cemetery has nothing to do with the fort, and
Okay.
vice versa.
Yeah.
A lot of people touring it don't understand that. They think it started as a military cemetery, and
But
it didn't.
Okay.
The cemetery was not created until 1875,
Okay.
and so it came along, years after the fort was actively used for military purposes. But there are several military figures buried there, both Union and Confederate.
Hmm.
I do a cemetery walking tour for groups there, and basically try to tell the story of Glasgow and Barron County through the people who are buried in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And so again, kind of hopping and skipping around time periods, but it's interesting because over the years, uh, women have not gotten their due recognition for
Mhm.
their role in life and communities, nor have African Americans. And so it's interesting to do the cemetery tour and to highlight some of those people
Right.
and bring their story to light, because they're just as fascinating as some of the people the women were married to or the daughters of. And so next year we will be celebrating the 150th anniversary of our cemetery.
Oh, okay.
And so I've been working on creating some special tours for 2025 that people will be able to do. And for example, one tour is going to be focused on the people who were buried there the very first year the cemetery was organized.
Okay.
And it's not a huge number of people, but it's fascinating to go and stand at their grave spot and you see, oh, and then their neighbor that's buried right over there died next in 1875.
Yeah.
And then the third one was up here on the hill. And
So you can kind of trace.
you trace the evolution of
Yeah.
the cemetery and how it was
Naturally,
laid
yeah.
out. And again, most of those people are not well known.
Right.
That they were what we would just refer to as ordinary people
Yeah, common
living in
folk.
Glasgow.
Yeah.
Several of them were children,
Mm.
and they most likely died of various diseases because we didn't do much vaccinating
Right.
in that era. So it's a fun way to learn the history of a community.
Yeah.
And how did that obelisk get there? Where was it made and crafted, and how long did it take to come from Italy to get to Glasgow, Kentucky? And
Yeah, because
that's
there's a few of those over there, aren't
yes,
there?
there are.
There's a handful.
Yeah, quite
So
a few.
anybody that's really notable, that interesting background, that are connected to that. I know that one is for one of the. Was it Lewis?
Yes, Asa Lewis. That's a memorial stone. He's
Okay.
actually buried in Tennessee, but he was a young Barron County boy who was enlisted in the Confederate Army. His commander was Braxton Bragg, who was known to be a very harsh disciplinarian.
Mm-hmm.
And Asa realized that his widowed mother and his sisters were really in a bind because there was no man around. Spring was coming. The crops needed to be put in, and they had no means of income. So he needed to go home for a while.
Yeah.
And he was denied a furlough, but he ran away and he was captured. And Braxton Bragg had advised his troops that, anyone else who deserts, if you leave without permission, we will hunt you down and you will be punished severely.
Mm-hmm.
And so Asa left a second time, and he was captured the second time, and he was killed, shot by a firing squad of his fellow soldiers the day after Christmas. And, just a tragic, cruel story that comes out of the Civil War. One of the most notable monuments there is for Ella Ellis Carden, and it's notable because everyone immediately looks at her stone because there's an image of Ella sitting in a chair on top of her monument.
Oh.
And it's almost like life size.
Yeah.
And it is an absolute, likeness of her and photographs of her. And so people over the years have created an awful lot of local tales about the woman in the chair.
Yeah.
And, and 99.9% of them are not true. So on my cemetery tour, we try to stick to facts.
Right.
And because sometimes the facts are really more interesting than the made-up tale. And she was the wife of a very wealthy businessman here in town, Lucian Carden, and they were well off. He has one of the most fascinating wills I've ever read in Barron County. He left property not to his brothers, but he left it to his brothers' wives.
Oh.
With the instruction that the farm he was leaving them and the money he was leaving them were for their use and had to remain in their name and could never be used to pay their husband's debts. So that's an interesting twist for 1893, that, a man is willing farms to his sisters-in-law.
Right.
With an instruction, don't you let my brother do anything with this. This is for you.
Were his brothers notorious for having been?
That would be interesting to know.
Yeah.
I'm aware of one of them that did have some difficulties. But one of the things that he also did was he left an instruction to spend approximately $1,200 creating a suitable monument for Ella that was to be in the center of his cemetery lot.
Okay.
And money, I think about $260 each for individual stones to mark their graves. And that's what we see there today. And people are fascinated by this enormous monument that has a woman sitting in a rocking chair on it.
I'm going to have to run back over there and see that.
Sure.
'Cause I went and toured the fort a little bit and kind of got pulled back out. But,
and, but some fascinating things and some fascinating people that that propelled this community.
Yeah.
And that's the real history of Glasgow. It's not necessarily what's in the book that you find on the shelf.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad we got to talk, about the train and stuff like that. But of course, it's the people that that made the decision to
absolutely
let's have this spur line.
And it's always fun to point out to tours the man who has a train engine engraved on his headstone, because he was in charge of the depot here at one time, and he's got a train engine. On his monument there in our cemetery. So kind of interesting. We have some of those immigrants. It's a fascinating thing to walk by Adolf Shader's monument, and it says that he was born on the Atlantic Ocean coming to America.
Wow.
And for me, that's just fascinating.
Yeah.
That, his parents were coming and she has the baby while they're crossing the ocean to come to this country. And that was important to put on his tombstone, of course.
Yeah, well, it's very notable that to even survive that, I would think at that time, to survive childbirth at sea would probably be a harrowing experience.
Well, I've never experienced it, but I'm sure it would be.
Yeah.
And So, you know, there are lots of great things, and it's fun to share that information with people and pass it on.
Yeah. Who's maybe one more notable person from Glasgow that we should, or maybe not even notable, just a curious story or something that to maybe leave us with?
Well, you know, it's hard to zero in on just one.
Fair, yeah.
But we had some truly outstanding educators in this community
Mm-hmm.
early on, early on, and that's continued. And it's fascinating to share their stories, and the fact that we had a women's college here, we had a normal school that a portion of it ultimately moved to Bowling Green and became Western Kentucky University.
Oh,
And it
okay.
started right here on Race Street and Front Street. And uh, so, you know, that's a big part of our community's history, and it's fun to share that.
Yeah. Well, I know you all take that mission seriously around here of educating and sharing the history, and
We certainly do. We try to.
and I've noticed that in the last few days that everybody seems to have at least a little bit of a grasp of what it means to live here and what these buildings were, and so I mean it's really neat to be immersed in that.
Oh, sure, sure.
And,
You know, we had fascinating merchants. Wynn Davis, who had this drugstore in this building,
mhm.
you know, he was a banker. He helped to found the hospital. He owned a drugstore. A businessman. He was involved in literally everything in this town in the early 20th century, and it's always fascinating to mention him. George J. Ellis. People love to talk about going down the street to George J. Ellis Drugs. It's no longer a drugstore. It's a breakfast spot primarily, but it was a long operating concern in the town, and everybody knew it. There was a period in the 20th century where it was the place everybody went to eat their
Everybody.
breakfast
Yeah.
and eat lunch, and there was a different special every day, and that table in the back was the Liar's Corner.
The Liar's Corner. I was
And,
talking to Beth about that.
yeah, lots of tales come out
Oh
of that
yeah.
portion of the building. Uh, Emmanuel Morris, the immigrant, and his story. Bruce Aspley having the vision to build the Plaza Theater because he wanted a first-rate theater, and he went to Atlanta and he studied the Fox Theater there,
Oh,
and
okay.
copied some of those ideas. At the time he built that, and it's having its 90th birthday this month in August, and it had its own built-in air conditioning system.
Oh wow.
Which was an enormous concrete pool of water under the stage that had fans that blew over it. And so in the summertime, you're sitting there watching the movie or somebody perform, and there's this soft, cold breeze that flows up from under the stage. And, you know, just fascinating.
Yeah.
And also the twinkling stars in the ceiling, you know, and there's a cloud machine that makes you think that you're sitting outside because the walls are decorated and designed to look like a Venetian courtyard. And,
Oh, okay. See, I haven't been in there. I didn't
oh
realize.
well, we need to go over there.
Yeah, that's one of. So those are called atmospheric. Is that right? What they call those theaters, or do I have that term right?
I would have to check on that.
Okay. My
But-
Maysville people are going to get mad at me
Yeah.
because they've got one up there too, and they're going to say you should know that. But
yeah, but yes, it's designed as though you are in a Venetian courtyard
okay,
with
yeah.
all the little balconies and lights behind windows in the wall and so forth, and you're watching this scene, sitting there. Meanwhile, the clouds are going across the sky. There are little stars twinkling in the ceiling. Cool breeze is keeping you comfortable, and it was a first-rate place.
It's so interesting that was considered like a part of it, almost like you were going to be outside in a courtyard watching it. The idea was to be inside, but have the feeling of being outside. It's just such an unusual thing to me but it was all the rage for a while, right?
Oh, yes.
In that era to
Yes.
build those. And,
Yeah, when movie houses were really unique places,
yeah.
not just a dark cinder block wall
Right.
that we're accustomed to today.
Yeah,
And
now it's
that's-
dark and it's quiet, and if there's any light, everybody's yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that was. Now you were telling me about some other firsts here. A doctor.
Oh, yes. Well, we've had several notable doctors. Dr. C.W. Froge, who was instrumental in accessing funds from the Commonwealth Fund in New York City to build our hospital. Dr. C.C. Howard was known beyond this country for his pioneering ideas. For this community, he opened the first hospital here, Maplewood Infirmary. He was the first to bring x-rays to this community. He was the first person to be able to get a vial of insulin to save a patient needing insulin. He brought the first radium, the first radiation therapy for cancer patients. Was also the father of Kentucky's tuberculosis hospital system that established TB hospitals in various cities around the state to help pretty much eradicate tuberculosis that was a real problem in the mid-20th century. So he did some just fascinating things. He decided to build his own clinic here right after World War II, known as the Howard Clinic. He was a friend of the Mayo brothers, and so he went to Rochester and worked with them and patterned Howard Clinic as a miniature version of Mayo Clinic.
Mayo Clinic.
Because he had general physicians, he had some specialists, they had a small hospital connected to it, and some just very cutting edge things. And he also established a rural medical scholarship to get young people becoming doctors in Kentucky to agree to go to rural towns. It's not hard to get people to want to go to the big city where they can be a doctor, but to come to a small town where they're truly needed is quite a task sometimes. And he was instrumental in doing that, and his work lives on in that way. He was also the doctor who went down into Sand Cave to see Floyd Collins.
Oh, I don't think I knew that was.
Yes,
he was tied into that story.
He was there, and I believe he was the person who actually officially pronounced him deceased. So a lot of very fascinating things, fascinating people in the community.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Floyd Collins on another podcast not too long ago, and that's such an interesting.
There's a lot to tell.
There is a lot, yeah. I'd like to come back sometime and get more of your perspective on that.
Sure, you need to.
It's a very important part, I think, of the cave wars and the local lore.
Oh yes, very much so.
I guess one more thing to talk about too, since we're talking about caves, is obviously Mammoth Cave is right here in or connected to the community. So we don't necessarily need to talk about the cave itself, but just of its importance to Glasgow and Barron County in general.
Well, it is in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Historically, Mammoth Cave is Kentucky's oldest tourist attraction. There have been tours going on since over 200 years now, well over 200 years. And a man here in Glasgow, Franklin Gorin, who happened to be the first child born in Glasgow and Barron County after it was settled, became a very highly recognized attorney, but he bought Mammoth Cave and owned it and operated it. And he also had a client that he represented in getting a divorce that was unheard of in the 1830s. And the gentleman couldn't pay his bill to Franklin Gorin, and instead he gave him a slave, and that slave was Stephen Bishop.
Stephen Bishop, okay.
And Stephen Bishop loved the cave system, and he went to Mammoth Cave, and of course he explored so much of the cave system and is such an important part of the history, and became sort of the star tour guide. You know, Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, you know, they all requested Stephen Bishop be their tour guide because, you know, at that time it was still by lantern, and you were wearing a caving costume and crawling around a lot, and, you know, no electric lights in the cave, and it would take about 9 hours in some cases.
Wow.
For those tours. So that's a fascinating thing that, you know, an African American enslaved individual from this community ended up becoming one of the most important figures in Mammoth Cave history, and we would not enjoy Mammoth Cave as we do today had it not been for someone like Stephen Bishop. So we're proud of that in this community. But today, Mammoth Cave is certainly the biggest attraction in the area and brings people literally from around the world, and it's a big part of our culture here.
Yeah. Well, it's you know, I've been exploring around and talking about Caveland, and I've realized that, you know, there's so much more to it than Mammoth Cave, but I couldn't I couldn't not mention it, you know, because it's right there. But it's really there's so much to see
there
in
is
and around here, and so much history that's tied up in not just the caves, but in the Civil War history and then the more modern history, like we talked about. And I really appreciate that you all seem to have all of that in your blood here, talking about it and making it a part of the story as we travel.
We certainly attempt to.
Yeah.
So we're proud of it.
Yeah.
And we want to carry on the tradition.
Yeah. Well, good deal. Well, thank you for spending some time with me today.
Sure. It's been a pleasure.
And, you know, maybe we'll sit down another time and tackle go deeper into some of these subjects.
That would be great.
Yeah. So, all right. And people can find you, Sam Terry's Kentucky, on Facebook or samterryskentucky.com. So if you don't do this social media thing, you can find it on the website.
Exactly.
And then we'll also provide links to our gracious hosts here at Simple Life and Copper and Elk and their other properties around. And of course, big shout out to Caveland Marketing Association for helping present this today too.
Yes,
so, and,
they do great work in promoting this area, and we are very grateful for them to give of their time and energy.
Well, it's a wonderful collaboration. It's great for me to see people across county lines being able to work together. And, you know, I was talking to some folks yesterday, and we're like, tourists don't know where the county line is.
No.
They don't. They just know we're here. And so it's great that people are being able to promote the region and really show off all the different aspects of what you have here.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, until we can do it again, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.